Kyle of the Northern Crown stood at the edge of the balcony, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the eastern gate. It was open. It was not meant to be. "She should have arrived by now," one of the councillors murmured behind him. Kyle did not turn. His daughter had never been late in her life. She had been raised on timing, on consequence, on the quiet understanding that one decision could reorder a kingdom. From the moment she could walk, the mountain had learned her weight. From the moment she could speak, it had learned her restraint. Lyra was not reckless, which was why the silence terrified him. A runner burst onto the terrace, breath sharp, control fraying at the edges. "My king," the boy said, dropping to one knee. "The eastern road." Kyle turned. "Speak." The runner swallowed. She passed through the lower gate, alone. At dawn, the world did not stop. That was the cruelty of it. The bells kept ringing. The torches burned steadily. The future, so carefully arranged through treaties and bloodlines and controlled succession, did not shatter at once. It cracked. Kyle's chest tightened, not with fear, but with recognition. "She chose," he said quietly. None of the councillors answered, because they all understood what choice meant when made by someone born to carry consequence. Far beyond the keep, beyond the reach of escorts and promises, Lyra walked beside someone she was never meant to love. Not an enemy, not a rival, something worse. A truth the kingdom had been built to deny. She did not look back at the mountain. She did not run. She held his hand as the first ward stone behind them split, not loudly, not violently, but with the sound of something ancient admitting it had been wrong. By the time Kyle reached the map room, the future he had tried to protect no longer existed as a single line. It had branched, and every branch led toward loss. Chapter 1. What an alpha tries to seal becomes a door. Kyle did not order the gates closed. That decision would haunt him later, not because it was wrong, but because it revealed the final illusion he still held. You could not seal a future that had already decided to leave. The map room smelled of ink and old stone. Candles burned along the walls in disciplined intervals, their flames steady, controlled. Everything here existed to make chaos legible. Borders were drawn thick, roots precise, alliances layered like careful armor. Kyle stood at the central table, one broad hand braced against the wood, eyes fixed on the eastern region where the mountain's shadow thinned into lowlands. Lyra had gone that way. "She cannot cross the southern ravine alone," a councillor said, voice brittle with disbelief. "Not with the wards active." Kyle said nothing. Another councillor leaned forward. "My king, forgive me, but if she has broken the binding without consent—" "She hasn't broken it," Kyle said quietly. The room fell silent. He lifted his gaze, and every voice died under it. "She was born of the line," he continued. "The wards respond to her as they respond to me." A terrible understanding settled across the table. "What you built to protect her," Kyle added, "will not stop her." He straightened slowly. The man who had ruled war fronts and winters, who had reshaped borders through pressure rather than bloodshed, now faced something no conquest had prepared him for, a future that refused to be contained. Lyra had been raised to inherit more than authority. She had been raised to hold the kingdom together. From infancy, elders had marked her as a stabilizing presence. Quiet where Kyle was force, intuitive where he was decisive. She learned languages not to speak them, but to understand silence between words. She learned law not to wield it, but to recognize its limits. Every lesson had been designed to keep her aligned with the throne. None had prepared her to meet something that made alignment feel like a lie. Kyle turned from the map and faced the council. "You will not pursue her," he said. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the chamber. "Not pursue," one councillor echoed. She carries royal authority. If she's compromised, if she's harmed, Kyle cut in, voice lowering, then I will burn every road between here and the lowlands myself. Silence. But, he continued, she is not compromised. She is choosing. The word tasted bitter. Choice was unpredictable. Choice dismantled structures built on expectation. She has aligned herself with him, Kyle said. One of the elders stiffened. You don't know that? Yes, Kyle replied. I do, because Kyle had seen the shift before Lyra ever spoke the truth aloud. He had seen it in the way she lingered at the edge of patrol routes, in the way she listened more than she spoke when reports came in from the border settlements, in the questions she asked about fairness, about restraint, about what happened to those who existed between categories, and he had answered carefully, too carefully. He is not what you think, a counselor said urgently. Whatever affection she believes she feels. It isn't affection, Kyle said, sharp now. It's recognition. The word landed like a fracture. Long ago, the kingdom had decided that certain bonds were dangerous, not because they caused immediate harm, but because they destabilized inherited order. So they were named forbidden, not outlawed, discouraged, erased quietly. Lyra had found the one truth that didn't fit the system, and instead of rejecting it, she had walked toward it with open eyes. Beyond the mountain, Lyra moved through fog-drenched valleys at a steady pace. Her cloak was pulled tight, boots damp with morning dew. She was not fleeing. She was not hiding. She was accompanying. Beside her walked the boy the kingdom had never known how to name. Not Alpha, not Omega, not subject, not enemy, just him. You don't have to keep going, he said quietly, watching her from the corner of his eye. Once you reach the river, turn back. I'll understand. Lyra shook her head. If I turn back now, everything that follows becomes a lie. He slowed slightly. Your father. My father, she said gently, tried to protect a future built without room for truth. She met his gaze fully. I won't inherit something that survives by pretending you shouldn't exist. Behind them, far beneath stone and crown and ceremony, the oldest ward stones split wider. Not enough to alert sentinels, enough to change what would follow. Back in the map room, Kyle closed his eyes for the briefest moment. He saw not destruction, but inevitability. She is no longer a piece in the future, he said. She is the variable. No one spoke, because everyone understood what variables did to carefully balanced systems. They didn't destroy immediately. They unraveled, slowly, precisely, until what remained could no longer pretend it had always been stable. Kyle opened his eyes. Prepare for reform, he said. Or war, someone asked. Kyle's voice was steady, or both. Far away, Lyra crossed the river without looking back, and the future, so carefully guarded, so fiercely protected, took its first irreversible step toward collapse. Chapter 2. The weight of what still stands. The river did not roar. That was what unsettled Lyra most. She had imagined, wrongly, that crossing it would feel dramatic, that the water would resist her, that the current would threaten to sweep her away, that some final sign would appear to warn her that she had stepped beyond return. Instead, the river accepted her. Cold water climbed her calves, then receded. Stones shifted underfoot, slick but manageable. The mist thinned as they reached the far bank, and the land beyond opened into a quiet, unclaimed stretch of earth, where no banners flew and no patrol routes were marked. Neutral ground. The kind of place that had once been common, before borders learned to harden. Lyra paused, breath steady, heart not racing but weighted, as if something inside her had clicked into a deeper register. Behind her, the boy stopped as well. You crossed, he said. It wasn't awe in his voice. It was disbelief. Lyra turned. You thought I wouldn't? I thought, he answered carefully, that you might stop being who you are once it became real. She smiled faintly. This is the most real I've ever felt. They moved on. The land rose gently, dotted with low grass and scattered stone remnants, old markers from a time when this valley had been a meeting ground instead of a margin. Lyra recognized the shapes immediately: treaty stones, neutral circle anchors, a forgotten architecture of compromise. This place used to matter, she said. He nodded. My mother used to say that borders are loud when trust is gone. Lyra absorbed that quietly. Your mother was wise. She was careful, he corrected. Wisdom didn't keep her alive. Lyra stopped again, turning fully now. You don't have to carry that alone. He didn't flinch. I've been carrying it alone my entire life, he replied. That doesn't change just because you're here. No, Lyra agreed softly, but the shape of it does. He looked at her then, not searching, not testing, measuring, as if trying to understand whether what walked beside him was a moment or a fracture in fate itself. Far north, the kingdom did not yet feel the absence. Life continued. Bells rang, markets opened, patrols moved in slow, orderly arcs. The illusion of continuity held, for now. But Kyle felt it. He felt it in the way reports came in slightly delayed, in how the ward scribes paused longer than necessary at the boundary stones, in the way the wind through the high towers carried a pitch that was off, not wrong, but changed. He stood alone on the eastern balcony, hands clasped behind his back. You raised her to choose mercy, said Elder Varin from behind him. You cannot be surprised she has chosen it where it is most dangerous. Kyle did not turn. I am not surprised. Then why does this feel like failure? Kyle exhaled slowly. Because mercy does not preserve systems. Varin stepped closer. It preserves people. Yes, Kyle said. And people disrupt systems. He finally turned. That is why rulers fear them. Below, the city moved like a living organism, smooth, functional, unaware of the tension threading its spine. She hasn't denounced the crown, Varin continued. She hasn't rallied dissent. She's simply gone. Kyle's gaze hardened. She has aligned herself with someone the system erased. That alone won't collapse the kingdom. No, Kyle agreed. But what follows will. He moved back inside, toward the long chamber where laws were etched into the walls, not parchment but stone. Each inscription a solved conflict, each solution built on the assumption that authority remained uncontested. Lyra's absence was not defiance, it was exposure. At dusk, they reached the edge of the lowland settlement. It was smaller than Lyra had imagined, less a village than an accumulation of people who had nowhere else to be. Homes built from layered materials, roofs patched rather than replaced, no central square, no banners. But there was order here, quiet, negotiated order. People looked up as they passed, not with fear, not with reverence, with calculation. She shouldn't be here, Lyra heard one voice murmur. She chose to be, another replied. The boy slowed. If you want to turn back, I won't, Lyra said immediately. Then softer, but tell me what happens now. He hesitated. Now, they'll ask why you came, and if your answer sounds like pity, he said, they won't listen again. Lyra nodded once. Then I'll answer honestly. A woman stepped forward from one of the inner structures. Her hair was braided tight, streaked with silver despite her youth. Her eyes were sharp, assessing. You've crossed the river, she said to Lyra. Not a question. Yes. You know what that means. Lyra held her gaze. It means I'm no longer protected by distance. The woman studied her for a long moment. Then, and him? The boy answered before Lyra could. She walked beside me. That was her decision. The woman's gaze flicked between them. Something like recognition passed through her expression. Come, she said finally. We'll talk before the night sets. Inside the central hall, not grand but solid, Lyra listened. She listened to grievances not voiced in court, to stories never recorded, to losses that didn't qualify as casualties because they occurred between definitions. No one shouted. No one begged. They spoke with the exhausted precision of people who had learned that emotion wasted breath, and Lyra did not interrupt. When silence finally settled, the woman asked, So, daughter of the Alpha-King, why are you here? Lyra stood. Because your existence has been treated as a complication instead of a truth, she said. And I refuse to inherit a future built on that denial. The room did not erupt. It stilled. The boy watched her closely now, not protectively, not expectantly, witnessing. You know what that costs, the woman said quietly. Yes, and you know what your father will do. Lyra's voice did not waver. My father will do what he believes preserves stability. And you? Lyra met her gaze. I will do what allows something new to exist. Silence again. Then the woman inclined her head. Then sit, she said. You'll need to learn how hard that is. That night, Lyra lay awake on a simple pallet. The ceiling above her was wood, not stone. It creaked as the temperature shifted. She had never slept anywhere so unguarded. And yet, for the first time, she did not feel watched by expectation. Outside, the boy sat on a low step, eyes on the stars. He did not look surprised when she joined him. You should rest, he said. I will, she replied. After I understand something, he waited. Do you believe what we're doing destroys everything? She asked. He was quiet for a long time. I think, he said carefully, it destroys what was never meant to hold. She nodded. Then we're not ending the future. No, he agreed. We're breaking the shell. Far away, in the heart of the kingdom, a wardstone cracked fully for the first time in centuries. Not with violence, with inevitability, and the Alpha-King standing before the law etched in stone, understood at last the truth no ruler ever wanted to face. You can protect a future from enemies. You cannot protect it from love that refuses to be managed. Chapter 3. Fault Lines Beneath the Crown. The first decree Kyle issued after Lyra's disappearance was not about her. That, in itself, unsettled the council. They had expected urgency, orders, riders dispatched, borders tightened under the respectable name of security review. They had prepared arguments for patience, contingencies for optics, language that could frame a retrieval as protection rather than control. Instead, Kyle summoned them at dawn and spoke of grain routes. The southern passes will reopen 2 weeks earlier than scheduled, he said. Reduce levy tariffs by 1/3. Reassign guards from ornamental patrol to infrastructure watch. Silence followed. Elder Varin studied him carefully. My king. Is this truly the moment? Kyle met his gaze. This is precisely the moment. Another counselor leaned forward. Your daughter is not a policy, Kyle cut in. His tone was calm, but the room felt it like pressure. She is not a precedent. She is not leverage. And she is not to be spoken of as a destabilizing variable unless you intend to name what she is destabilizing. That silenced them properly. Kyle moved to the etched wall, fingers brushing the stone where 100 solved conflicts lived as permanent answers. He stopped before an older inscription, one so worn the language had softened, when unity fractures tighten the center. We've relied on that law too long, Kyle said. The center is brittle. A murmur moved through the council. "You're proposing decentralization," someone said carefully. "Now, I'm proposing honesty," Kyle replied. "If our systems fail when one woman walks away, then they were never strong. They were obedient." Varin exhaled. "You taught Lyra this." Kyle did not deny it. "She learned better than I expected," he said quietly. Beyond the river, Lyra woke to work. Not assignments, not ceremonial obligations. Work that existed because if it did not, things would break. She helped repair a collapsed storehouse roof using hands that had only ever held quills and ceremonial blades. She listened to disputes that ended without verdicts, because everyone involved had to live with one another the next morning. By midday, her muscles ached in ways training had never produced. This exhaustion felt earned. The woman with silver-threaded hair, Mara, watched her from the edge of the courtyard. "You don't move like someone raised without choice," she said. Lyra wiped sweat from her brow. "I wasn't raised without it. I was raised with the weight of it." Mara nodded. "That's worse." They walked together through the settlement's inner paths, narrow, uneven, deliberately unstraight. "No one rules here," Myra explained. "We coordinate. When someone tries to lead too loudly, they discover very quickly how alone they are." "And conflict?" Lyra asked. "We don't prevent it," Myra said. "We survive it." Lyra absorbed that in silence. Later, as evening settled, she found the boy Ash near the riverbank, skipping stones with more force than accuracy. "You're angry," she said. He snorted. "Brilliant insight. You're not angry at me." "No," he admitted. "I'm angry that you fit." She tilted her head. "Fit where?" "Here," he said, gesturing. "You don't flinch. You listen. You don't treat this place like a penance." Lyra stepped closer. "Is that a problem?" "Yes," he said flatly, "because it means they'll trust you, and when they trust you, they'll risk things, and that scares you." He looked at her sharply. "Because when things break," he said, voice low, "people like you survive the fallout. People like us bury the cost." Lyra did not argue. Instead, she sat beside him on the cold stone. "Then don't let me be people like me," she said. "Hold me to consequence." Ash studied her, really studied her, for the first time without history clouding his sight. "That's not how power works," he said. "It is if I refuse the insulation," Lyra replied. Silence stretched between them, not tense, but heavy with possibility. The first fracture became visible on the 7th day. A supply caravan from the north arrived without escort, deliberate, cautious, unprecedented. The traders brought grain, cloth, medicine, and questions. "They say the Alpha King ordered reduced tariffs," one man said suspiciously. "That border enforcement is..." "Lighter." Mara's jaw tightened. "That's not charity." "No," Lyra said. "That's acknowledgement." "Of what?" Lyra met the trader's gaze. "Of dependence." Word traveled faster than any rider. By the time the second caravan arrived, rumors had preceded it. By the third, expectation followed. Back at the keep, reports piled up, not of rebellion, not of unrest, but of adaptation. Local councils forming. Trade paths stabilizing. Old neutral grounds repurposed. Kyle read each report with the same quiet focus. "They're reorganizing without command," a general said uneasily. Kyle nodded. "They always could." "You're allowing it?" "I'm allowing reality," Kyle replied. "There's a difference." Varin approached him after council. "You know where this leads." "Yes," Kyle said. "To the end of centralized authority." Kyle smiled faintly. "No, to the end of unquestioned authority." Varin hesitated. "And Lyra?" Kyle's gaze drifted to the window, to the eastern horizon. "She's doing what I couldn't," he said softly. "She's living the correction instead of enforcing it." That night, Ash finally spoke the question he'd been circling. know he'll come eventually, he said. Yes, Lyra replied. Not with soldiers, he clarified. With truth, she nodded. That will be harder. And when he asks you to come home? Lyra looked toward the dark river, where moonlight fractured and reformed endlessly. I'll ask him what home protects, she said, and who it excludes. Ash swallowed. That might break him. Lyra's voice was gentle. Or free him, far away. Beneath the mountain, an ancient cornerstone shifted, not collapsing, not cracking, but making space, and the future, once a single line guarded by force, began finally to widen. Chapter 4. When stability learns to listen. The delegation did not arrive announced. That was how Lyra knew it was real. No horns sounded across the lowlands. No banner crested the road. No formal envoy rode ahead to establish posture and precedence. Instead, 3 riders approached at walking pace, cloaks dust-worn, insignia turned inward rather than displayed. They stopped at the river's edge and waited. Ash saw them first. They're trained, he said quietly, eyes narrowed, but not performing. Lyra stood beside him, feeling the air shift, not with threat, but with gravity. They're not here to claim, she said. They're here to ask. Mera joined them, expression unreadable. Asking is new. It won't stay new unless it works, Lyra replied. The riders did not cross until invited. That alone set the settlement murmuring. When they finally stepped onto neutral ground, the lead figure removed her gloves and bowed, not deeply, not submissively, but with unmistakable respect. I speak under open terms, she said. No summons, no demands. Lyra inclined her head. Then speak. I carry words from the Alpha-King, the woman continued, not commands. Silence thickened. Mera folded her arms. Say them. The envoy took a breath. He acknowledges this settlement as a standing community, not a temporary convergence. He recognizes its right to self-governance, trade and defense within its own borders. A ripple moved through the gathered people, not excitement, not relief, shock, and, Mera pressed, and he requests, not requires, a framework for coordination. Grain flow, medical response, conflict mediation when disputes cross territory. Lyra felt the weight of it settle, not an offer of control, an admission of limits. Ash exhaled slowly. He's rewriting authority in real time. Mera's gaze cut to Lyra. Because of you, Lyra did not deny it. Because of truth. The envoy met Lyra's eyes then, something raw breaking through her composure. He said, if you chose not to return, he would still answer the consequences of that choice. That, more than anything, cut deepest. Lyra closed her eyes briefly. Tell him, she said, opening them again, that coordination is possible, but only if it remains voluntary and visible. No closed chambers, Mera added sharply, no shadow decisions. The envoy nodded. He expected that. When they left, still without escort, the settlement did not celebrate. Instead, people sat together longer than usual, talked quietly, argued without volume, systems adjusting. Back at the keep, Kael stood alone before the great map. It had changed, not physically. No one had dared redraw it. But the meaning of its lines no longer held. Borders now felt conditional, less like walls, more like agreements waiting to be renewed. You're dismantling your own power, General Reth said behind him. Kael did not turn. I'm relocating it, Reth scoffed. To places you can't see, to places that can survive without me, Kael replied. Silence. She won't come back, Reth said finally. No, Kael agreed, not as she was. And that doesn't terrify you? Kael turned then, eyes steady. It does, Reth studied him. Then why continue? Because fear that clarifies is better than certainty that lies, Kael said. He gestured to the map, This kingdom outlived stronger kings than me. It will outlive my discomfort. Reth hesitated. And if it doesn't? Kael's voice softened. Then it deserved a different future. In the lowlands, Lyra felt the shift before it showed. People began asking her questions that were not about procedure, but about judgment. What would you do? How would this have been handled in the mountain? Where does fairness break? She answered carefully, never instructing, never positioning herself above the work. Ash noticed anyway. They're orbiting you, he said one night as they walked the perimeter. You're becoming a reference point. Lyra slowed. That's dangerous. Yes, Ash agreed. And inevitable. She stopped fully now. Then help me disrupt it. He frowned. How? Contradict me when I'm wrong, she said. Challenge me when I simplify. Remind me what I can't see. Ash studied her face, searching for irony. Found none. You're serious. I was raised inside authority, Lyra said quietly. I know how it hardens. He nodded slowly. Then understand this. She waited. If you ever start speaking for us instead of with us, he said, I won't hesitate. Her mouth curved, not in amusement, but in something like relief. Good, she said. The first real test came with the storm. It tore down from the eastern heights without warning. Rain hammering the valley, river swelling fast. The old crossings vanished in hours, and for the first time, the settlement needed help it could not generate alone. Lyra did not issue orders. She asked questions. Who had boats? Who knew the river best? Which routes remained passable? Ash coordinated without title. Mera negotiated access to stored supplies. Messengers ran, not with commands, but with information. When northern patrols arrived, not to seize control, but to assist, the transition was smooth. No one was overruled. No one was ignored. By dawn, the river had peaked and receded. No lives lost. No authority asserted. Ash sat on a crate, soaked and exhausted, watching the sun rise. I didn't think this could work, he admitted. Lyra sank beside him. Neither did I. And yet, she echoed. The report reached Kael 2 days later. Storm response, cooperative. Joint operations, voluntary. Local leadership, effective. No crown intervention required. Kael read it twice, then once more. Varin watched him closely. You look lighter. Kael smiled faintly. I feel obsolete. That's not a pleasant feeling for a king. No, Kael agreed, but it's a necessary one. He folded the report carefully. She's not destroying the future, Varin said. Kael's gaze lifted. She's testing whether it deserves to exist. Outside, the bells rang, not to mark authority, but weather clearance. And somewhere beyond the river, a young woman who had been born to inherit power was learning something far more dangerous: how to let it breathe. Chapter 5. The day the question was asked aloud, the question did not come from the council. It never does. It rose from the lowlands at midday, carried not by a single voice, but by the tension of many deciding at once that silence was no longer efficient. Who decides when this ends? The words were spoken by a man with dirt under his nails and a ledger tucked under his arm, someone who measured risk by harvest loss, not ideology. He stood near the riverbank where the old markers had been pulled free and repurposed as seating. Lyra felt the shift immediately. This was no longer about coordination, or storms, or supply routes. This was about duration, about whether what they were building was a moment, or a structure that would eventually demand a crown of its own. She did not answer right away. That, too, was deliberate. Ash leaned closer. If you answer too cleanly, they'll mistake it for certainty. Lyra nodded. And if I don't answer at all, they'll build one without saying so. She stepped forward. No one decides when this ends, she said calmly. Because it isn't a single thing. A murmur rippled outward. This way of working, she continued, isn't a replacement for the kingdom. It's a response to what the kingdom couldn't see from the mountain. The man frowned. That sounds temporary. It is, Lyra agreed. So is every structure that survives. Mayra watched her closely now, less like a guardian, more like a measuring instrument. Temporary doesn't mean fragile, Mayra said. No, Lyra replied. It means adaptable. She turned back to the gathered people. If this cooperation stops working, it should end. If it grows rigid, it should be corrected. If it starts protecting itself instead of the people it serves, she stopped there. Let them finish it. It should be broken, someone said quietly. Lyra nodded. Exactly. That settled something. Not excitement, not devotion, permission. That evening, Ash found her alone near the water, fingers trailing through the cold current. You didn't claim anything today, he said. I refused it, she replied. That's harder, she smiled faintly. I've noticed. Ash hesitated. They'll still follow you, yes, and someday, he added carefully, you'll have to choose whether to lead or step aside. Lyra's expression grew distant. I already know which I'll choose. He studied her. You say that now. She looked back at him, eyes steady. I say it because I was raised to see what happens when people don't. The message arrived 3 days later, not carried by envoy, not sealed with authority. It came by hand, folded once, written in Kael's own script. Lyra recognized it immediately. She didn't open it at first. She sat with it through the length of a meal, through a dispute resolved without her, through the hum of a place learning how to exist without reference to the mountain. When she finally unfolded it, there were only 4 lines. I will come without title. I will listen before I speak. I will accept what you choose. Father. Ash read it over her shoulder, then looked up sharply. That's dangerous. Yes, Lyra said. For both of us. Mayra's jaw tightened when she was told. One man with that much gravity can distort a room without trying. I know, Lyra said. Then why allow it? Lyra folded the letter carefully. Because if this only works when the old power stays away, it isn't real. Kael arrived at dawn. 1 horse, no guard, no crown. He dismounted at the river's edge and waited. The water moved as it always had, unimpressed. Lyra crossed alone. They did not embrace. They did not bow. They stood a few paces apart, the space between them dense with years unsaid. You look, Kael began, then stopped. Different? Lyra offered. No, he corrected softly. Aligned. She inclined her head. You taught me to value that. I taught you control, Kael said. You found coherence. They walked, slowly, visibly, into the settlement. No one knelt. No one jeered. People looked at Kael the way they looked at storms once they'd learned the signs, with respect, not fear. They sat in the open hall. No elevated seat, no procedural shield. Kael listened to grievances, to successes, to the careful way Lyra spoke less than anyone else in the room. Hours passed. When silence finally settled, Mayra spoke. You built a system that erased us, she said plainly. Kael nodded once. Yes. You benefited from it. Yes. And now you're watching it loosen. Yes. Mayra leaned forward. Why? Kael did not look at Lyra when he answered. Because my daughter walked away, he said, and the world did not collapse. A breath moved through the hall. And, Ash asked quietly, Kael turned to him, and because what survives without force deserves to. Silence followed, not strained, not reverent, testing. Lyra finally spoke. You didn't come to ask for me back, she said. No, Kael replied. I came to ask whether I still have a place in the future I tried to protect. Lyra held his gaze. Not as an anchor, she said, but as a participant. Kyle nodded slowly. Then I will learn. Outside the river flowed, unchanged, unconcerned. But on both banks, something fundamental adjusted. Not a rebellion, not a surrender, a recalibration. And for the first time in generations, the future was not being guarded by force, but negotiated, openly, by those willing to bear its weight together. Chapter 6. The Cost of Staying. Kyle remained. That was the first disruption, not his presence. People adapted to that faster than expected. But the fact that he did not leave once listening became uncomfortable. He stayed when the questions sharpened. He stayed when stories contradicted the official record. He stayed when silence stretched long enough that no one felt obligated to fill it for him. By the third day, the settlement stopped reacting to him as the Alpha King and began responding to him as a man who took up space and required accountability for it. That was when the real work began. The issue surfaced quietly, as most destabilizing truths do. A dispute over river access escalated between two outer communities, one upstream, one downstream. The upstream group had reinforced their banks after the storm, improving flow control for themselves but limiting water access below. No malicious intent, just survival choices colliding. In the past, the Crown would have issued a ruling, compensation calculated, compliance enforced. Here there was only conversation and consequence. Lyra watched the meeting from the perimeter. She did not sit beside Kyle. She did not mediate. Ash facilitated, not leading but keeping the structure intact. Voices rose. Accusations sharpened. Old resentments resurfaced, pulling history into the present like a weapon. Kyle listened, and for the first time he understood something that had never made it into reports. When authority solves conflict too efficiently, it prevents people from learning how to survive disagreement. The meeting ended without resolution. People left frustrated, but still talking. Kyle exhaled slowly. This would not stand in the kingdom, he said quietly to Lyra afterward. No, she replied, but neither would this conversation. It's inefficient. Yes, and fragile. Yes. Kyle looked toward the river. Then why does it feel correct? Lyra answered without looking at him. Because fragility forces care. That night, Kyle did not sleep, not because of danger, but because the systems he had trusted for decades were rearranging themselves inside him, and none of them had been built to move. He walked alone through the settlement, noting what wasn't there. No guard rotations announced by horn, no curfews, no hierarchy written into architecture, and yet order, messy, negotiated, alive. A young woman recognized him near one of the outer fire pits. You're him, she said plainly. Yes, Kyle replied. She studied him. I thought you'd be taller. He smiled faintly. I've been told. She gestured to the open seat beside her. Sit, or don't. Either way, answer something for me. He sat. Why didn't you stop her? She asked. Kyle did not deflect. Because I raised her to understand consequence, he said. Stopping her would have taught her fear instead. The woman nodded slowly. Fear builds clean towers. Yes, Kyle agreed, and empty ones. She looked back to the fire. Then maybe you didn't fail as badly as people think. The words landed heavier than any accusation. By the fifth day, pressure arrived from the north. Not military, political. A delegation from a neighboring territory requested clarification. Was this settlement under Crown authority or not? Were its agreements binding across borders? Who bore responsibility if things went wrong? Kyle read the message aloud to Lyra. They're asking for a shape they recognize, she said. Yes, Kyle replied, because ambiguity terrifies neighbors, and certainty terrifies people inside it. She countered. Kyle folded the letter. There will be consequences for refusing to formalize this. I know. Trade disruptions, treaty hesitations, opportunists, I know. Kyle studied her. You're willing to accept that? Lyra met his gaze evenly. Are you? Kyle exhaled. I spent my life ensuring consequences landed where I could see them, he said. This asks me to trust what I cannot control. Lyra's voice softened. It asks you to trust what you taught me. Silence settled between them. Thick, honest. Kyle nodded once. Then we respond together. The reply was simple. The settlement was not sovereign. It was not annexed. It entered agreements as a collective, not a banner. Responsibility was shared. Failure would be faced openly. The message unsettled everyone it reached, and that, more than anything else, revealed how unprepared the world was for structures that did not centralize blame. On the seventh night, Ash finally voiced what had been building. You can't stay forever, he said to Kyle. Kyle nodded. I know. And when you leave, Ash continued, the pressure returns. Harder. Yes. Ash glanced at Lyra. Are you ready for that? Lyra did not hesitate. Yes. Ash looked back to Kyle. Are you? Kyle considered the question longer. Not yet, he admitted. But I'm closer than I was. Ash nodded once. That might be enough. The day Kyle prepared to leave, the settlement gathered, not for ceremony, but closure. No speeches were planned. Lyra stood beside her father, the river behind them. You're not handing this back to him, Myra said quietly to Lyra. No, Lyra replied. I'm handing it forward. Kyle stepped closer to Lyra, lowered his voice. I won't protect this from the world, he said. I'll protect the world from destroying it too quickly. Lyra smiled, small but genuine. That's all I ask. They embraced then, not as ruler and heir, but as two people who had both paid something to understand truth. As Kyle mounted his horse, he turned back once. Lyra, yes, the future you chose. It will break things. She nodded. It already has, and it may break you. She met his gaze without flinching. Then I'll know it was real. Kyle rode north. The river flowed on, and in the space he left behind, the settlement did not fracture, but inhaled, braced, and prepared to stand on its own weight. The future, no longer protected by a crown, had learned something far more dangerous: how to endure without permission. Chapter 7. What remains after authority leaves. Kyle's departure did not feel like loss. That, more than anything, unsettled Lyra. She stood at the riverbank long after the sound of hooves faded, expecting, irrationally, a vacuum, a sudden lurch in the air, a sense that something vital had been removed. Instead, the settlement exhaled, not in relief, in responsibility. People dispersed without instruction. Conversations resumed where they had paused. A trader argued prices. A child tripped and was lifted up by 3 different hands before Lyra could move. Life did not wait for permission. Ash came to stand beside her, arms folded loosely. This is the part that scares everyone, he said. Because there's no one left to blame? Lyra asked. He nodded. Because if this fails now, it's ours. Lyra watched Mara organize a work group, not directing, just connecting people who already knew what needed doing. Then let it be ours. The consequences arrived quietly, as promised. Trade slowed first. Not dramatically, no embargoes, no threats, but hesitation. Caravans that once arrived twice a week began coming once. Prices adjusted. Margins tightened. People noticed. "This is the cost," someone muttered near the grain stores. "Yes," Lyra agreed aloud. "It is." She did not soften it. She did not reframe it as noble suffering. She treated it as data. Which routes had alternatives? Which goods could be locally sourced? Where did reliance turn into vulnerability? The settlement did not panic. They reorganized. Ash coordinated exchanges between outlying communities. Barter networks expanded. Skills moved where goods could not. Efficiency dropped. Resilience rose. The first attempt at CO option came a month later. A northern lord, minor, ambitious, impatient, arrived with gifts and proposals. "You need representation," he said smoothly, seated at the communal table. A recognized voice. "I can provide that." Mera's smile was sharp. "At what cost?" "Stability," he replied. "Protection." Lyra leaned forward slightly. "From whom?" The Lord hesitated. "That answer is why we're not interested," Ash said flatly. The Lord's eyes flicked to Lyra. "You understand what you're refusing?" "Yes," Lyra said calmly. "Shortcuts," he scoffed. "This won't last." Lyra met his gaze. "Then it doesn't need saving." He left irritated, not angered, which meant he would talk, and that was dangerous in a different way. That night, Lyra could not sleep, not from fear, from accumulation. She walked the perimeter alone, feeling the strain settling into her bones. Every decision here carried weight without abstraction. Every failure would land where it started. Ash found her near the old marker stones. "You're tired," he said. "Yes. Good leaders burn out," he said. "On this scale, fast. I know. Then why do you stay so close to everything?" Lyra stopped walking. "Because distance turns people into concepts. I was raised among concepts." Ash studied her face. "You don't trust anyone else to carry this." She swallowed. "Not yet. That's how power reforms itself," he said gently. "Through necessity." Lyra closed her eyes. When she opened them, resolve had replaced fatigue. "Then we change that," she said, "starting now." The next day she stepped back, not abruptly, not theatrically. She stopped attending every meeting, redirected questions, sat on the edge instead of the center. When people asked her judgment, she answered with questions instead. Some resisted, some resented it, some panicked, but others stepped forward. Voices Lyra had not heard before, quieter, steadier, began shaping discussions. Decisions slowed, then improved. Ash watched it happen with something like awe. "You're dissolving yourself," Lyra smiled faintly. "I'm distributing." Weeks passed. The settlement did not grow larger, but it grew denser. Connections thickened. Redundancies formed. If one person faltered, 3 others already understood the work. When news arrived that a neighboring territory was experiencing unrest, the settlement debated, not whether to intervene, but whether help would harm more than absence. They chose to offer resources without structure. It worked, mostly. Failure came anyway. A supply miscalculation led to shortages, tempers flared, accusations surfaced. No crown intervened. No father arrived to steady the ground. Lyra sat through it all, hands still, voice measured. "We missed something," she said simply. "Let's find it." They did, together. Far north, Kael received reports with no clear author. That pleased him. Outcomes without ownership, stability without enforcement, disputes resolved without escalation. Not perfect. Real. Varen read over his shoulder. "You've created something no one can conquer cleanly." Kael shook his head. "She has, and if the world doesn't allow it." Kael looked out at the mountain horizon. "Then the world will have to become more honest about what it fears." On the night the first snow dusted the lowlands, Lyra stood by the river again. The water was lower now. Clearer. Ash joined her, breath visible in the cold. "Do you regret it?" he asked. She considered the question seriously. "No," she said, "but I understand the cost now, and I still choose it." Ash nodded once. "Then whatever breaks next, we'll face it awake." Lyra watched the current move around the stones, unchanging, adaptable, unconcerned with who named it. The future no longer needed permission. It only needed people willing to remain when certainty left, and Lyra stayed. Chapter 8. The Shape of Endurance. Winter did not arrive with drama. It came the way truth usually did, slow, undeniable, stripping things to what actually mattered. Frost settled into the ground at night and loosened again by noon. Breath turned visible. Movement became intentional. People measured warmth the way they once measured time. The settlement adapted, not because it planned for winter, but because it no longer wasted energy pretending conditions were neutral. Lyra watched this with a quiet, almost painful awareness. She had been raised in stone halls where winter was an inconvenience solved by stored fuel and thicker tapestries. Here, winter was a shared equation. One household's excess mattered to another's survival. No ledger made that connection abstract. It forced a different kind of honesty. The first real fracture came mid-season. A nearby community, newer, less cohesive, sent word asking to integrate fully, not cooperate, not trade, join. They were struggling. Leadership was contested. Their systems were failing faster than adaptation could catch up. Mara read the message aloud in the open hall. Silence followed. Absorption meant responsibility, resources, mediation, possible collapse spreading outward. Ash spoke first. "If we take them in, we stop being a network and start becoming a center. And if we don't," someone countered, "we prove we only work when it's easy." All eyes drifted, not to Lyra but past her. That, she realized, was the difference. She was no longer the axis. Still, her voice carried weight. Lyra stood, not to decide, but to frame. "We are not neutral," she said. "We will affect them whether we integrate or not." She let that settle. "So the question isn't what keeps us pure," she continued. "It's what we're willing to risk becoming." Mara studied her. "That's not an answer." "No," Lyra agreed. "It's a responsibility." Debate lasted hours. They chose conditional integration, shared resources, shared labor, no structural takeover. A trial measured in seasons, not promises. It was messy, it was imperfect, it was honest. The cost showed quickly. Food stores tightened. Conflict multiplied. Some people left, unwilling to live inside uncertainty that could no longer be blamed on distant authority. Lyra felt every departure like a small failure. Ash noticed. "You're carrying this again," he said one night as they checked supply tallies. She didn't deny it. "People are leaving because of decisions we made. People leave kingdoms, too," he said. "They just don't get to see the chain that led there." Lyra exhaled slowly. "Visibility doesn't reduce pain." "No," Ash agreed, "but it gives it meaning." Snow fell properly after that, white and heavy. The river slowed but did not freeze, current too strong, movement too constant. Lyra stood watching it one morning when Mara approached, expression unreadable. "They're asking for you," Mara said. Lyra frowned slightly. "For me?" Mara nodded. "Not to decide, to explain." Something in Lyra tightened. Explanation was dangerous. It invited coherence to settle into authority. Still, she followed. The hall was full, not tense, focused. A man spoke first. "We want to know if this works long term." Lyra nodded. "So do I." A woman added, "If this fails in 5 years, we want to understand why." Lyra absorbed that. Another voice, We don't need certainty. We need orientation. That word landed differently. Lyra stepped forward. What we're doing won't stabilize into something permanent, she said. And if it tries to, you should disrupt it. Murmurs, not dissent. Alignment. This isn't a system that ends history, Lyra continued. It's one that survives change. That means it will feel unfinished, always. She met their eyes one by one. If what you want is safety through structure, this will disappoint you, she said. If what you want is dignity through participation, it might hold. Silence followed. Then Mara inclined her head. That's sufficient. The meeting ended. No vote, no proclamation. Lyra's knees shook afterward, not from fear but from release. That night, Ash found her sitting alone near the fire, hands outstretched for warmth. You answered without anchoring, he said. She smiled faintly. I'm learning. You could leave now, he said. This wouldn't collapse. She looked up at him. You're right, she said slowly. It wouldn't, and that doesn't bother you. It terrifies me, Lyra admitted. Which is how I know it's real. Ash sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Not possessive, not symbolic, just present. You know, he said quietly, love didn't destroy everything. Lyra looked at him. It destroyed the illusion that everything needed protecting, she said. He smiled. That's a better ending than the stories tell. She watched the fire crackle, sparks lifting and vanishing. Endings aren't my focus anymore, she said. Continuation is. Ash nodded. That's heavier. Yes, Lyra agreed. But it doesn't lie. Outside, the wind moved through the settlement. Not resisted, not commanded, adjusted to, and in the quiet persistence of shared labor, disagreement survived without fracture, authority softened into function, and the future, unsecured, unguarded, held, not because it was protected, but because enough people stayed when leaving would have been easier. Chapter 9. The quiet test of permanence. Spring arrived unevenly. Snow lingered in shaded hollows while grass pushed stubbornly through thawed ground elsewhere, as if the land itself were unsure which version of the future it preferred. Paths turned to mud, roofs leaked. Tempers, long restrained by winter discipline, surfaced in unexpected ways. This was the season that broke fragile systems. Lyra knew it. She had read histories where uprisings began in spring, not from hunger but from movement returning faster than certainty. People who had endured winter suddenly wanted answers, direction, confirmation that endurance meant something. The settlement felt it too. Work continued, but conversations sharpened, decisions took longer. Some voices began repeating more than contributing, patterns forming. Ash noticed before Lyra did. They're looking for edges, he said, as they watched a heated discussion spill into the open yard, trying to find where this thing begins and ends. Lyra's mouth tightened slightly, and when they find them, they'll push, he replied, not maliciously, just to see what holds. Lyra nodded once. Then we should stop pretending this doesn't have limits. The incident that forced the question was small, embarrassingly small, a dispute over storage priority. Medical supplies versus seed reserves spiraled into accusation when a distribution decision appeared to favor one group repeatedly. No hoarding, no corruption, just pattern without explanation. Voices rose, meetings stalled, trust thinned. Someone finally said it aloud. We don't know how decisions are being made anymore. The hall went quiet. Lyra felt the weight settle immediately, not on her authority, but on her restraint. This was the moment where leaders often clarified by seizing ground. She did the opposite. You're right, she said calmly, and that's a failure. A few people blinked. No defense followed. We've been coordinating informally for too long, Lyra continued. Trust carried us. But trust without visibility erodes faster than control. Ash stepped forward beside her, not to support, but to stand exposed to the same scrutiny. So, here's the correction, Lyra said. No more decisions without trace. Every allocation, every prioritization, logged, visible, explainable. Murmurs followed. And if that slows things down? Someone asked. Then that's the cost, Lyra replied. Speed without comprehension isn't efficiency, it's opacity. Mera studied her carefully. You're proposing structure. Lyra met her gaze. I'm proposing memory. The distinction mattered. They agreed, not cleanly, not unanimously, but openly. The change altered everything. Boards went up, wooden, rough, public. Decisions recorded in plain language. Disagreements noted, not erased. People lingered longer, reading. Arguments shifted from accusation to interpretation. Still tense, still human, but grounded. Lyra stopped touching the boards herself after the first week. Ownership transferred. The message from the north arrived on an ordinary afternoon. No crisis tone, no urgency. An invitation. The High Assembly, long symbolic, rarely decisive, requested Lyra's presence. Not as a subject, not as a delegate, as an observer. Ash read the letter twice. That's strategic. Yes, Lyra agreed. They want proximity without acknowledgement. Mera folded her arms. If you go, they'll measure you. If you don't, they'll define you. Lyra considered that quietly. I'll go, she said. But not alone. Ash frowned. They won't want... I'm not asking permission, Lyra said. I'm setting a condition. The journey north was slower than it used to be, not because of obstacles, but because Lyra was no longer insulated from the land. Each village they passed through held echoes of the shifts she had helped initiate. Not praise, not blame, adaptation. People asked questions without reverence, offered food without ceremony, spoke of changes without fear. When the mountain finally rose ahead of them, sharp and familiar, Lyra felt something unexpected, not homesickness, perspective. The hall of the High Assembly had not changed. That was the problem. Stone seats elevated certain voices by design. Acoustics favored authority. Even silence felt curated. Lyra stood near the back. Ash stood beside her. Kyle did not sit at the center. That too was new. When discussion began, it circled familiar ground, trade fluctuations, border uncertainties, the settlement's influence spreading faster than anticipated. Finally, someone asked the question they'd been avoiding. What are you building? Lyra stepped forward, not into the center, but into the open. We're not building, she said. We're unlearning. Murmurs followed. Unlearning hierarchy where it replaces responsibility, she continued. Unlearning speed where it erases consent. Unlearning stability that depends on silence. A counselor scoffed. That's idealism. Lyra nodded. So was the idea that a crown could hold an entire future. Silence fell heavier this time. Kale watched her, not with pride, not with sorrow, with relief. What happens when it fails? Another asked. Lyra met his gaze. Then we study why, and let it inform what comes next. That's not governance. No, Lyra agreed. It's accountability. No resolution followed, and that was the victory. When they left the mountain, Ash released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. You didn't give them anything to contain, he said. Lyra smiled faintly. Neither did they. The settlement welcomed them back without ceremony. Work resumed. That night, Lyra stood at the river again, the same place where everything had fractured and begun. Ash joined her. They'll keep watching, he said. Yes, they'll try again. Yes, and this will never settle. Lyra nodded. No. Ash smiled, not widely, but honestly. Good. She looked at the water, clear and moving, carrying no memory of who crossed it first. The future doesn't need us to finish it, Lyra said quietly, just not to lie to it. Ash rested his hand briefly against hers, not claiming, not anchoring, witnessing, behind them, the settlement held, not as a monument, not as a rebellion, but as a living argument that love had not destroyed everything. It had simply refused to let false certainty survive. Chapter 10. The future unclaimed. The settlement did not notice when it crossed the invisible threshold. That was how Lyra knew it mattered. There was no declaration, no anniversary, no moment that could be pointed to later and framed as when it became permanent. Instead, the signs appeared sideways, subtly, unmistakably. Disagreements shortened. New arrivals asked questions before making demands. Children learned names of processes instead of titles. The work no longer revolved around preventing collapse. It revolved around living. Lyra watched this with a careful, almost painful restraint she had learned, slowly, deliberately, that systems capable of endurance were also capable of outgrowing their architects. And she was no longer the architect. That realization carried both relief and grief. The final test came not from outside pressure, but from within alignment. A proposal surfaced organically, a rotating facilitation council, temporary, accountable, deliberately incomplete. No decision-making authority, only coordination, memory, transparency, no crown in disguise, just scaffolding. The debate was quiet. That worried Lyra more than shouting ever had. This creates stability, someone said. It creates legibility, another countered. And legibility becomes power, Ash added carefully. All eyes turned, not to Lyra, but to the structure itself. Lyra did not intervene. She had promised herself she wouldn't. The decision passed narrowly, and the settlement did not fracture. That was the sign. Structures could exist without consuming the ground beneath them. The days that followed felt lighter, not easier, lighter. Lyra stepped back further, leaving the center entirely. She took on work that no one noticed, documenting failures, tracing patterns, making sure lessons didn't vanish just because pain faded. Ash noticed anyway. "You're disappearing again," he said one evening, as they walked the familiar river path. "Yes," Lyra replied. "On purpose?" "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "Then what are you now?" Lyra smiled, not faintly this time, but fully. "A participant," she said. "Nothing more dangerous." Ash nodded. "That's honest." News from the north arrived less frequently, not because influence faded, but because reaction slowed. The kingdom adjusted, not cleanly, not bravely, but undeniably. Trade routes realigned without edicts. Local councils experimented, some failing publicly, some succeeding quietly. Authority became a little less absolute, enough to matter. Kyle sent no directives, only questions. Lyra answered none of them directly. She didn't need to. The night before she left, because she did leave eventually, the river was calm. Ash stood beside her, arms loose at his sides. "You're not staying," he said. "No. And you're not taking anything with you." "No." He exhaled. "Then this isn't exile." "No," Lyra agreed. "It's circulation." They stood in silence as the moon reflected cleanly on the water. "Did love destroy everything?" Ash asked quietly. Lyra considered the question, the one the world had framed so dramatically, so falsely. "No," she said. "It destroyed the lie that everything deserved to stay the same." Ash smiled. "That's not a tragedy." "No," Lyra said. "It's an inheritance." She left at dawn. No escort, no farewell gathering, just movement. The settlement did not brace itself, it adjusted, and that was how Lyra knew it would survive. Epilogue. What endures without watching? Years later, people would argue about where it began. Some would claim it was a princess who refused her future. Others would say it was a king who learned to step aside. A few would insist it was inevitable, that history had simply bent where it was weakest. They would all be wrong. It began when certainty loosened its grip long enough for truth to breathe. The settlement still stood, changed, argued with, imperfect. The kingdom still ruled, less loudly, less blindly. Borders still existed, but they moved when they had to. And somewhere on a road without banners, a woman walked, carrying no authority, no prophecy, no claim, only understanding. The future did not follow her. It did not need to. It had learned how to move on its own.